Okay, so let's discuss collisions. It's an important topic related with center of mass, system of particles, and everything. Okay. So see here, we can based on NEET and JEE questions, we can divide directly into two parts. This collision. One is one-dimensional collision. Okay. One D. One-dimensional collision. Okay. Second will be 2D collision. Two-dimensional collision. Okay. In fact, we can discuss 3D collision also, but if you understood 2D collision, same way 3D collision will be there. So it is not separate theory for this one, right? Logic will be similar, so you can always do. So mainly 1D collision, one-dimensional collision, two-dimensional collision will be asked. Okay, what is one-dimensional collision? If everything is happening in a straight line. Now that straight line can be any straight line, not necessarily x-axis. See, x, y, z is all straight lines. So suppose object A is there, it collides with B, right? It's happening in this straight line. Okay. So then it is 1D collision. And if you'll go more technical into what is meaning of that, so you have to understand in 1D collision, like this is a center C1 for A, this is center C2 for B. So when they will collide, let me just magnify that collision time. That what is meaning of 1D collision, you have to understand. So this is A, this is B. Now there's a center C1 for it. We are taking, let's take any spherical ball. It can be a tennis ball or billiards ball or anything to make you understand. Okay. So A will apply force on B, B will apply force on A. And movement of A and B. Like here, let's take velocity is V1. This velocity is V2. So V1 velocity and V2 velocity, they are in the same straight line. Okay. So when V1 and V2 both are in same straight line, right? C1, C2, then we'll say it is 1D collision. Now, important aspect of this is when they will apply the force on each other, when A will apply force on B and B will apply force on A, it will be along the direction of C1, C2. Along the direction of C1, C2 only they will apply, because it's a normal force. If you remember, we discussed that how the force is applied by a wall also. Suppose there is a wall and any tennis ball is striking the wall. So wall will apply a force perpendicular to the wall. Normal reaction. So whenever two objects are colliding, the forces are applied along the common normal. So that common normal, you have to understand here that what is meaning of a common normal. Forces are applied along the direction of common normal. So along the C1, C2, forces will be applied. Along C1, C2, forces will be applied. Okay. So common normal is C1, C2 direction. So along that direction only, we will apply forces. Okay. So when the forces which is applied along C1, C2 and V1, V2 is in the same direction, then it will be a 1D collision. So what will happen? Their velocities are along that C1, C2 line. Their forces are also along C1, C2 line. Impulsive forces will be along C1, C2 line. So any change will occur only along C1, C2 line. So it cannot move from this C1, C2 line. So suppose C1, C2, we are saying this is x-axis, right? Suppose we'll say this is x-axis. So everything will happen along x-axis. Suppose we name this as y-axis. Everything will happen along y-axis. Suppose you name this as z-axis. It will happen along z-axis. So everything will happen along the same straight line. Object cannot deviate from x-axis. Okay. Now, what will be 2D collision? Now try to understand in the same way that what will be the 2D collision. Okay. So suppose we are talking about a 2D collision, right? Two-dimensional collision. Then what will happen? The object's velocity will be in different direction. Okay. Object velocity will be in different direction than C1, C2. So now this is A, this is B, this is their center, C1, this is center of B, C2. So forces are applied along C1, C2. Forces, or more accurately, we'll say impulsive forces, or we'll say just impulse. So impulse is applied along this direction. This we can always say this is I. A is applying impulse on B. A is applying impulse on B. On what direction this is applying? I'm just drawing that impulse in terms of green. So A is applying impulse on B along the green direction. So that is an impulse, right? And B will apply same impulse on A by using Newton's third law, we can say, along this direction. Basically, here also it is happening same. Impulse is applied by B on A and similarly A on B. Okay. So this impulse is applied along same direction, C1, C2. So A will apply green impulse on B, B will apply the blue impulse. But their velocities can be in different direction. Now the velocity, suppose V1 is in this direction and V2 is in this direction. Now what will happen? There are two directions involved here, not just C1, C2 direction. In fact, perpendicular to C1, C2, we can always take one direction. Right? Always we can take direction. So there will be two directions involved here. Now this will be x-axis and this will be y-axis. Why two direction will be involved? Because V2 is not coming, V1, V2 is not coming fully along x-axis, unlike in the 1D collision. So here velocities V1 and V2 are not along x-axis, right? It has some component along y direction also. So y direction component will be unaffected. Why it will be unaffected? Because whatever force B is applying on A is along x-axis. And whatever A is applying on B, that is also negative x-axis. So basically it is along x-axis forces. So they will not interfere along y direction. So we can say in 2D collision, as you can see here, this will be 2D collision, y direction velocities will be unaffected. Y direction velocity will not change. Y direction velocity will not change. Why will not change? Because impulsive forces are applied only along x-axis. A is applying on B along x-axis. B is applying on A and on negative x-axis. So this will not change any y direction velocity. So y direction velocity will be same. So this is 2D collision when x and y both is involved. 1D collision, only x-axis is involved. Everything is along x-axis. Forces are along x-axis. Velocities are along x-axis. Okay. So these are 1D and 2D. So all of you should understand that what is the difference between 1D collision and 2D collision. That is the most important. Particularly NEET and JEE, we have to understand clearly. Because they can always ask a y component of velocity, not x component. So y component of velocity, which is perpendicular to the direction of impulse, will not change in any case. So that will always be constant. So this is the main point which we have to remember in terms of 1D collision and 2D collision.